Welcome back. Let's go ahead and get started on this lecture on cognitive dissonance theory. Humans desire harmony, harmony in our environments, harmony in our relationships, and harmony, probably most of all, in our own minds. When things conflict, when our ideas contradict one another or our behavior contradicts our ideas, there's a moment of possibility for change. And from the point of view of this class, we might say there's a moment of possibility for persuasion. Now, Travis Knuckles and Chris Baker, two filmmakers, took to the streets and they asked random strangers whether they thought homosexuality, being gay, was a choice. And a very interesting thing happened. Let's take a look.
I think the people. It depends on what they grow up finding out. I think it's a choice later in life, but it depends on upbringing. When did you choose to be straight? Um, that's a good call, man. I didn't choose to be. So born.
Okay, so pretty interesting thing happened there. Did you see the moment when he realizes that his own beliefs about himself, he didn't choose to be straight, conflicted with his beliefs about other people? People choose to be gay. And you can see at that moment he has some discomfort. He lets off this nervous laugh. He seems almost embarrassed. And at that moment, we might say that he's experiencing what social psychologists call cognitive dissonance. And after experiencing cognitive dissonance, notice he just changes his mind. Oh, well, maybe it was a choice after all. So cognitive dissonance theory, created by social psychologist Leon Festinger, explains how we respond to conflicting thoughts and behaviors. It tells us how we react and try to fix feelings of dissonance that we get when things just don't line up. So today in this short lecture, I'm going to teach some of the main concepts and explanations that cognitive dissonance theory offers. And then we'll take a look at how we might use cognitive dissonance theory as we craft our persuasive speeches for round number 3. So to begin with, it's important to know what is meant by cognition. When you hear the word cognition, think thinking. Cognitive activity is thinking. It's mental activity. So I like to think of these little cogs down here spinning in my head. That helps me remember it. Also the word recognize, to think again, recognize. So recognition. Anyways, when you think cognition, think mental activity. Now, in cognitive dissonance theory, there's a term acognition that gets used, and it's a little strange, but acognition, when we're talking about that, we're talking about a single thought, right? A piece of knowledge, a thought unit. Okay, so we have all kinds of thoughts, right? We have all kinds of cognitions. We have cognitions about beliefs. We have cognitions or thoughts about our attitudes. We think about our emotions. We think about our behaviors. We think about our values. All of these things are kinds of cognitions. We have thoughts about all kinds of things. Did I leave the oven on? Ooh, he's really cute. The square root of 64 is 8. And like these 3 examples, many of the ideas that we have, floating around in our brains have very little to do with one another. When our cognitions don't have much to do with each other, we call this cognitive irrelevancy. So cognitive irrelevancy is when the ideas just don't relate. Now, it might be the case that they are related, but we're just not aware that they're related. So from our perspective, they're cognitively irrelevant until, somebody points it out to us or we figure out that they're actually lined up. Cognitive, on the other hand, it's possible that our ideas are related, and when they are, we call that cognitive consonants. So some of our ideas line up. One idea maybe explains or fits with or follows from another. So, for example, I might have a cognition that, hey, I'm an adventurer. I'm somebody who values adventure. And then I might also think to myself, I could like skydiving, right? I'm an adventurer. I could like skydiving. Those are two separate thoughts, but certainly they're related. They fit together, and we might even say that one follows from the other. Or it might be the case that our thoughts match our behavior. So when our behavior matches our beliefs, that's also called cognitive consonance. I believe I'm a healthy person and I avoid fast food and I go regularly to the gym. Now, when we have cognitive consonance, this feels good to us. We like it. We like harmony in our minds. We like things to line up. And so we become a bit like Happy Cat here. Now, the opposite of cognitive consonance can also be true. Our ideas can sometimes contradict or conflict with one another, and this is called cognitive dissonance. Right? Here we see an image of two pretty dissonant messages. Imagine yourself driving along and you counter this contradiction on the road. You would probably be somewhat confused and perhaps frustrated. It might stress you out, right? So when we experience cognitive dissonance, when two of our ideas don't line up or are in fact in contradiction with one another, or when our beliefs and our behaviors are in conflict with one another, it makes us feel psychologically uncomfortable. We don't like it and we get like Grumpy Cat here. Or as Leon Festinger puts it in his book, A Theory of Cognitive Dissonance, published in 1957, the existence of dissonance, being psychologically uncomfortable, will motivate the person to try to reduce the dissonance and achieve consonance. In other words, cognitive dissonance can motivate us to make some sort of change. Okay, so we get uncomfortable, and then that discomfort motivates us to try to fix things. Well, cognitive dissonance, you might be wondering, explains how these changes might occur. And they're going to give us three possibilities for how we might make a change after we experience cognitive dissonance. First is we might change cognition, right? We might stop believing something that we currently believe. We might start believing something else, right? So I believe that I'm a healthy person, but my friend points out that I also really value, sleeping in and eating a lot of food. So those two, the belief in that value and the belief that I'm healthy, contradict with one another. So I might change my belief about myself. I might start believing, hey, I'm actually unhealthy. Another possible change that we can make is we would change behavior, right? We might change our behavior in order to bring it in line with our beliefs. Again, using my example, let's say I believe I'm healthy and my behavior is to binge eat fast food. Well, someone points that out to me. It's a contradiction. It makes me uncomfortable. I might seek to change my behavior to bring it in line with my belief that I'm a healthy person. So another possibility is that, and this third possibility actually kind of represents cognitive dissonance theory backfiring a little bit for us. When a person experiences cognitive dissonance, they may double down on their current position and try to explain it away and reduce the dissonance that they're feeling by trying to make sense of the contradiction. So let's say that I have a friend who believes that they are charitable, that they believe that they are a person who values charity, but at the same time they often express disdain for the poor. Or let's say, yeah, that's the case. So maybe this person, if you pointed out to them that, hey, you believe in charity, but you're not very charitable in your views on poverty, if you pointed that out to that person, they might explain away why they have this uncomfortable position, right? So they may say, I believe in charity and goodness, but I grew up in a poor family and I saw firsthand how people cheated the system, right? Okay, so it might not make sense to you, but they've found their way through and explained their position. So you pointed out their dissonance, and then they fixed the dissonance by doubling down or maintaining their current position, and in fact, kind of refining their argument in the process. So this third possibility does represent a risk with cognitive dissonance. It can, in fact, cause people to become even more anchored in their beliefs. But the other two, changing their thoughts, changing their behaviors, represents a real promise for us as persuasive speakers. Okay, so at this point, you may be wondering, so what? Well, that's cognitive dissonance theory in a nutshell. We have many different cognitions, most of which are irrelevant to one another as far as we're concerned. Some do line up or have consonance, and some contradict or have dissonance. When we become aware of our dissonant thoughts, we experience discomfort, which motivates us to make some kind of change. So what does this have to do with persuasive speaking? As many of you know, this is the persuasive unit, and we have this speech coming up. So I want to encourage you, when you're crafting your arguments, to consider the ways in which you can appeal to your audience's desire for consonance. In other words, we can try to create dissonance in our audience with the hope that they're going to want to restore consonance, and they'll be motivated to make a change. So another way of thinking about this is you can create dissonance in your audience by pointing out that two of their beliefs about the world contradict, or that their beliefs about their behaviors contradict one another. And then we can go about offering a solution that will allow the audience to restore consonance. Okay, so the end goal is, after we create dissonance, to then offer a pathway for our audience to restore consonance. And that pathway is going to be, our policy that we're advocating for in speech number 3. So let's take an example here. Let's say I'm giving a speech and I'm arguing for a change in policy. I want to convince my audience that the United States should reduce the prison population by ending the war on drugs. So I may start my speech by pointing out that a belief my audience likely has, let's say many of us believe that the United States is a country that values freedom, right? So I'm going to do some audience analysis. I determined that I have a moderately patriotic audience, so I'm going to appeal to that patriotism, right? Many of us believe that we have a country that values freedom. We believe that we have one of the greatest justice systems in human history, one that is fair, based in law, and deferential to the rights of citizens. Would it shock you then if I told you that according to recent statistics from the International Center for Prison Studies, the United States has by far the highest rate of incarceration, and at 2.4 million has the highest number of prisoners of any country in the world. The next closest country, China, has over 3 times our population and about half the number of prisoners. Okay, so what's going on here, right? I begin, right, by appealing to my audience's patriotism. You think the United States is a great country. Okay, so I state that. Then I introduce some dissonance into the equation, right? I offer a fact supported by statistics that kind of contradicts the idea that the United States is a freedom-loving place, right? We have so many prisoners. And I even bring up the idea that China, a country that's bigger than us, has fewer prisoners than us, right? And the reason I use China, again, I'm appealing to my audience, right? Americans have a tendency to think that their country is more free than China, right? China's a communist country, notorious for its um, um, violations of human rights. Okay, so if the United States looks worse than China in this one area, that should cause a considerable amount of dissonance in a patriotic American audience, right? So now that I've introduced dissonance into the equation, my audience feels a little unsettled and they're ready to hear a solution, right? And that's when I pivot towards ending the war on drugs to reduce the number of prisoners, which is my central claim, my policy goal of my persuasive speech. Okay, so the good news here is that when we're going to be working on crafting our organizational strategies for speech number 3, all of the organizational strategies that we're going to be using really align well with cognitive dissonance. All of them involve first introducing a problem. This is the moment where you want to really create dissonance and then work your audience from that feeling of dissonance towards your solution. So problem solution speech, as you'll hear about in a later lecture, is a two-part speech where you first introduce the problem and then move towards the solution. Problem cause solutions, very similar to that. You break the effects of the problem, the causes of the problem, and the solution to the problem as your 3 main points. And then Monroe's motivated sequence is also a problem solution speech. It's going to use slightly different terms though. But in Monroe's motivated sequence, you say that there is a need, there's some sort of problem that's causing a need. You introduce a solution to satisfy that need, and then you have the audience kind of visualize themselves in a future in which that need was satisfied. I'll explain these organizational strategies later at a more detailed fashion, but for now you just need to know that all of our organizational strategies are going to really allow you to create dissonance towards the beginning of your speech and then move towards consonance at the end of your speech. So to conclude, when you are crafting your arguments, consider the ways that you can create dissonance in your audiences and then work them toward your preferred solution as a way to relieve their tension. It's really rare in persuasion that our audiences will just drop their beliefs, drop their behaviors, and just wholesale accept what you're asking them to accept. Oftentimes that doesn't happen. People are pretty stubborn and stuck in their ways. However, if we use and create cognitive dissonance in our speeches, we can unsettle our audiences. We can kind of rattle them a bit. And once we get them rattled or unsettled, we can get them into motion, even if it's just moving them a few steps in our direction. If we use cognitive dissonance, we can create a moment of possibility for persuasion. Thank you.